Hey guys, day 75 of the RC practice series. So in the first paragraph, author tells us about the pre-1975 effort to unionize government clerical workers. He tells us that the effort was limited to areas of concentrated workforce and it was sometimes in spite of worker receptivity. Second paragraph introduces the idea of a shift in strategy since mid-70s. The largest change in the percentage of unionized government workers has come from clerical cadre. And the third paragraph discusses the reasons for this change. Author believes that the primary reason for this change is that the clerical cadre has many women workers, and over the course of last few decades, women demands have increased as well as have been legitimized over the course, which sort of explains the change in policymakers' effort. All right, question number 1. According to the passage, the public sector workers who were least likely to stay unorganized in 1977 were, okay, in 1977, 34% of government clerical workers were represented by a labor organization, which means 66% were unorganized. Okay, compared to the 46% of government professionals, 44% of government blue collar workers, and 41% of government service, which means the respective percentages of unorganized workers would be 54, 56, and 59. Now the question says, according to the passage, the public sector workers who were least likely to stay unorganized, least likely to stay unorganized. So we are looking for the minimum percentage, which is this. Therefore, the correct answer is government professionals. A should be the correct answer. Question number 2. The author cites union efforts to achieve a fully unionized workforce in order to account for why. Okay, please understand the question first. Why does to explain what has the author cited union efforts to achieve a fully unionized workforce? So here he says receptivity to unionization on the workers' part was also a consideration, but when there were large numbers involved or the clerical workers were the only unorganized group in jurisdiction, the multi-occupational unions would often try to organize them regardless of their receptivity. So whether or not the workers wanted to be organized, the multi-occupational unions wanted them to be organized. They tried to make them organized. Okay. And the reasoning was based on the concern that politicians and administrators might play off unionized against the non-unionized workers. And second, the second reason was the conviction that a fully unionized public workforce meant power. Okay, so author cites the union efforts to achieve a fully unionized workforce in order to account for why the unions sometimes tried to organize the workers regardless of the workers' initial interest in unionization. So the thought flow here basically tells us that author provides us reasoning why uh, the unions tried to organize the clerical workers regardless of their initial receptivity. So this part explains the reasons why. Therefore, the answer has to be D. He cites the union efforts in order to explain why they wanted the clerical workers to be organized regardless of their initial interest. Option A, politicians might try to oppose the public sector union organizing. Alien idea. The thing about politicians, the fact mentioned about them was that politicians might try to pit unionized workers against non-unionized workers, and not that they oppose public sector organizations. Public sector unions have recently focused on organizing women. This idea is not attributed to the unions earlier, pre 1975. Early organizing efforts often focus on areas where there were large number of workers. That's a fact, factually true, but it does not answer the why part. It does not. It's not a reason to mention the union efforts to achieve a fully unionized workforce. Number 3, the authors claim that since the mid 1970s, a new strategy has emerged in the unionization of public sector clerical works would be strengthened if author did what? Okay. Please mind it, guys. The author's argument is that a new strategy has emerged since the mid 1970s, which means there has been a shift in the strategy. Now, if author could explain the reason behind this shift, his argument would be strengthened. Okay. What has changed? Basically, we are looking for a variable that has changed, something that has changed, and not something that has remained constant. A new strategy has emerged. His argument would be strengthened if he could explain what has changed. Option A described, if author described more fully the attitudes of clerical workers towards labor organization, the attitudes and not in the shift in attitudes. Had this answer choice talked about shift in attitudes, it would have been correct. Here it only talks about attitudes, which might have remained constant, therefore not the answer. Option B, compared the organizing strategies employed by private sector unions with public. Now, the comparison between private sector and public sector is irrelevant to the discussion of the change in strategy regarding public sector unions. If the author explained why politicians and administrators sometimes oppose, again, they opposed earlier to and they still oppose unionization. So there is no shift in their attitude. That would not strengthen the author's argument that a new strategy has emerged. D, if the author showed that the factors that favored unionization drives among those workers prior to 1975 have decreased in importance. Now, this is the shift. This is the change we were talking about. To understand, if the author could show that the factors which were important earlier are no longer important, that would strengthen the argument that a new strategy has emerged. Because there has been a shift in factors, there has been a decrease in the relative importance of these factors. New factors have emerged and new strategy has emerged. It would strengthen. According to the passage, in the period prior to 1975, okay, which means first paragraph is the source only, each of the following considerations helped determine whether a union would attempt to organize a certain group of clerical workers, except, okay. So what are the factors that help to determine whether a union would attempt to organize a certain group of clerical workers? Let's see. Option A, the number of clerical workers in that group. Yes, it is mentioned. Large number of workers favored unionization drives, which means it was an important factor. The number of women among the clerical workers, not mentioned anywhere. I think this should be the answer. Option C, whether the clerical workers in that area were concentrated in one workplace. It is also mentioned. Concentration of small numbers in one or two locations. This was also a factor. the degree to which the clerical workers in that group were interested in unionization. Now, this is a tricky choice. So it is mentioned that in certain jurisdictions, the unions did not care whether workers wanted to be unionized or not. They simply made efforts to unionize them. But it was true only in the areas where their numbers were large, or the jurisdiction had only one group of only clerical workers were the unorganized group in a particular jurisdiction. In other jurisdictions, here it was written, in localities where the clerical workers were few in number, were scattered in several workplaces, and expressed no interest in being organized, unions more often than not ignored them. The unions ignored them where their numbers were low, or they expressed no interest, and they expressed no interest in being union. So the degree of interest was a factor. It was definitely a factor in certain areas, while not in certain others. Where their numbers were large, the unions did not care. They went for it. But where the numbers were low, whether or not they were interested was an important factor that determined whether they would make attempts. So D is also a factor mentioned. Tricky choice. The correct answer is B. Number of women workers was not one among a consideration. Among the considerations. Number 5. The main concern of the passage is to, okay, let's see, to advocate particular strategies. Author is not advocating anything. The style of writing is not prescriptive. Option B, explain the differences in unionized proportions of various groups of public sector workers. That's a narrow detail, maybe. That's only in the second paragraph. The focus is not on the differences in the unionized proportions of different groups of workers. The focus is narrow on the clerical cadre and how the efforts to unionize the clerical cadre went up post 1975 or 1977 to be precise. Option C, evaluate the effectiveness of certain kinds of labor unions. Author is not evaluating effectiveness of labor unions. Also, this is vague and too broad. To analyze and explain an increase in unionization among a certain category of workers that is specific to the topic of the passage. Option D should be the correct answer. Hope you guys enjoyed it, guys. Keep watching, keep improving. Your VM signing off.